Welcome to one of the most suppressed industrial disasters in American railroad history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this documented account. We want to know what places and what times of day or night these stories reach around the world. In the autumn of 1889, 23 experienced railroad workers entered the Blackstone Tunnel in the Bitterroot Mountains of western Montana. They were completing the final section of a tunnel that would connect the mining towns of the region to the main rail lines. It was dangerous work, but no more dangerous than 100 other tunnels being built across the American West during that era of rapid expansion. The workers went in for their shift on October 17, 1889 at 6 a.m. They never came out, not one of them. Not alive anyway. This is the story of the Blackstone Tunnel disaster, a tragedy that the Northern Pacific Railroad tried desperately to erase from history, a horror that led to the abandonment of an entire rail route that had cost millions to construct, and a tunnel that was sealed permanently with 23 bodies still inside, because retrieving them would have meant going back into depths where something waited in the darkness. Something that had tasted blood and wanted more. The Bitterroot Mountains of western Montana were a significant obstacle to railroad expansion in the 1880s. The Northern Pacific Railroad, racing to complete its transcontinental line, needed to establish branch routes to the rich mining districts that were producing silver, copper, and gold. These branch lines would transport ore to smelters and bring supplies to isolated mining camps. The problem was geography. The mountains were steep, heavily forested, and riddled with narrow valleys that made rail construction extremely difficult. The solution was tunnels. Lots of them. Between 1885 and 1890, the Northern Pacific and its contractors bored through dozens of mountain barriers throughout Montana. Most of this work proceeded without major incident. Tunnel construction was dangerous by nature. Men died from cave-ins, dynamite accidents, and bad air. But these deaths, while tragic, were considered acceptable losses in the rush to complete the railroad network. The Blackstone Tunnel was supposed to be just another of these routine projects. The tunnel was named for the distinctive black metamorphic rock of the mountain it pierced. Located approximately 15 miles west of the town of Missoula, the tunnel was to be 2,400 feet long, running straight through the base of Blackstone Peak. The route it enabled would save 20 miles of track compared to going around the mountain, and would provide access to several productive mining operations on the other side. Construction began in April 1888. The project employed two crews working from opposite ends of the tunnel, drilling, blasting, and clearing rock in the time-tested method of tunnel boring. Progress was steady. By the autumn of 1889, after 18 months of work, the two bores were scheduled to meet in the center of the mountain. This moment, called breakthrough, was always a cause for celebration among tunnel crews. It marked the successful completion of the most difficult phase of the project. According to records preserved in the Montana Historical Society archives, the breakthrough was scheduled for the week of October 14, 1889. By October 12th, the two crews were only about 30 feet apart. They could hear each other working, the sound of drills and hammers echoing through the thin wall of rock that remained between them. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The two crews were led by experienced foremen. The crew working from the western portal was led by Sean Murphy, age 44, an Irish immigrant who had worked on tunnel construction throughout the American West for 20 years. His crew consisted of 11 men, all experienced hard rock miners. The crew working from the eastern portal was led by Wilhelm Schmidt, age 38, a German engineer who had supervised tunnel projects in Europe before coming to America. His crew also numbered 11 men, most of them immigrants from various European countries seeking their fortunes in the American mining boom. 23 men in total, counting the two foremen, all experienced, all aware of the dangers of tunnel work. all confident they could complete this final push safely. The roster of workers, compiled from railroad employment records and newspaper accounts, lists them as Sean Murphy, foreman, Western crew, age 44. Thomas Brennan, age 31. Patrick Donovan, age 27. Michael O'Leary, age 34. James McCarthy, age 29. William Burke, age 36. John Sullivan, age 25. Daniel Kelly, age 33. Wilhelm Schmidt, foreman, Eastern crew, age 38. Hans Bergmann, age 32. Klaus Weber, age 29. Friedrich Muller, age 35. Gustav Hoffmann, age 27. Johann Richter, age 31. Andreas Zimmermann, age 33. Stefan Vogel, Heinrich Fischer, age 30. And Karl Schneider, age 26. These 23 men entered the tunnel on the morning of October 17, 1889, expecting to complete the breakthrough within 2 or 3 days. They carried enough supplies: food, water, candles, and lamp oil for a full week underground. This was standard practice. Crews often worked extended shifts during the final phases of tunnel construction to maintain momentum and avoid the time lost in entering and exiting the long bore multiple times per day. A support crew of 8 men remained at the surface, maintaining equipment, preparing supplies, and monitoring ventilation. These surface workers were the last people to see the 23 tunnel workers alive. According to their statements, given to investigators in the weeks following the disaster, the workers entered the tunnel in good spirits. There had been no indication of any problems. The rock had been stable, the ventilation adequate. This was to be the final push, and then they would all celebrate the successful completion of a difficult project. The plan was for the crews to signal periodically by ringing a bell system that ran along the tunnel roof. 1 ring meant all clear, work proceeding normally. 2 rings meant requesting supplies or equipment. 3 rings meant emergency, send help immediately. The surface crew was to maintain communication with both ends of the tunnel, relaying messages as needed. For the first 24 hours, communication proceeded normally. Bells rang at regular intervals indicating steady progress. The surface crew sent down fresh water and additional lamp oil as requested. Everything seemed fine, but on the evening of October 18th, something changed. At approximately 8 p.m., the surface crew at the western portal heard 3 bells. Emergency signal. They immediately organized a response team and prepared to enter the tunnel to investigate. Before they could enter, however, they heard sounds from within the tunnel. Not the normal sounds of drilling and hammering, but something else. Shouting. Screaming. The sounds echoed weirdly in the long bore, making it difficult to determine exactly what was happening. The surface crew called down into the tunnel entrance, asking what was wrong. No coherent response came back, just more shouting and what sounded like running footsteps. Then silence. Complete and absolute silence. The surface crew waited, listening. Nothing. They called into the tunnel again. No response. They rang the bell system from the surface. No answer came back. After 15 minutes of this unnatural quiet, the surface supervisor, a man named Robert Crawford, made the decision to enter the tunnel with 3 volunteers to investigate. Crawford and his 3 men, equipped with lanterns and rope, entered the western portal. They proceeded cautiously, alert for any signs of cave-in or flooding, the most common tunnel emergencies. But as they went deeper, they found no evidence of any structural problem. The tunnel was intact. The timber supports were solid. The ventilation seemed adequate. Everything appeared normal except for one crucial thing. There was no sign of the workers. At approximately 1,200 feet into the tunnel, halfway to where the breakthrough point should have been, Crawford's team found the first evidence that something was wrong. Tools lay scattered on the tunnel floor as if dropped suddenly. A lunch pail was overturned, its contents spilled. A jacket hung on a timber support, but no workers. Crawford called out repeatedly. His voice echoed down the long bore and came back empty. The team continued deeper. At about 2,000 feet, they found more disturbing signs. A lantern lay broken on the ground, its oil spilled and absorbed into the rock dust. The tunnel walls here showed fresh gouges, as if something had scraped against them with great force. And there was blood. Not a lot, but several distinct spatters on the tunnel floor and walls. Crawford examined these marks carefully. The blood appeared fresh, less than a few hours old. But whose blood? And what had caused the injury? The team reached the point where the breakthrough should have occurred. The two bores had met. Sometime during the previous day, the last wall of rock had been cleared away, joining the western and eastern sections into one continuous tunnel. This should have been a moment of triumph. Instead, Crawford and his team found themselves staring into a scene that made no sense. The breakthrough area was in chaos. More tools scattered, rock debris spread everywhere, and carved into the freshly exposed rock face where the two tunnels met was something that stopped Crawford cold. Symbols, or marks. Something that looked deliberately made, scratched or carved into the dark stone. They were geometric patterns, roughly circular, about 2 feet in diameter. 3 of them, arranged in a triangular pattern. Crawford could not imagine what natural process would create such marks, nor could he imagine why workers would waste time carving them. More alarming was what the mark suggested about timing. The breakthrough must have occurred recently, within the past day, which meant both crews should have been here, celebrating, or at least securing the area. But both crews were missing. 11 men from the west, 11 from the east, and 2 foremen, all gone. Crawford sent one of his men back to the surface to report, while he and the remaining 2 continued through the breakthrough point into the eastern section of the tunnel. They proceeded carefully, examining everything. The eastern section showed the same signs of sudden abandonment. Tools, equipment, and personal belongings left behind. At about 200 feet into the eastern section, they found Schmidt's engineering notebook lying open on a flat rock. The last entry, dated October 17th, noted progress measurements and estimated breakthrough would occur within hours. Nothing indicated any problem. They continued to the eastern portal, searching the entire length of the tunnel. They found no workers, no bodies, no evidence of where 23 men could have gone. It was as if they had simply vanished from a sealed space. The only way in or out of the tunnel was through the 2 portals, and the surface crews at both ends confirmed that no one had emerged. Crawford retreated to the surface and immediately telegraphed the railroad company headquarters in Helena. He reported that all 23 workers were missing under inexplicable circumstances. The company responded by sending a senior engineer, a man named Douglas Hamilton, to take charge of the situation. Hamilton arrived on October 21st with a team of investigators and a larger crew of workers to conduct a thorough search. Hamilton organized a systematic investigation. His team spent 3 days examining every foot of the tunnel. They looked for any signs of cave-ins, flooding, or toxic gas that might explain the disappearance. They found nothing. The tunnel was structurally sound. The ventilation was adequate. There were no hidden voids or passages where workers might have become trapped. The only unusual findings were the mysterious symbols carved at the breakthrough point, and a general sense, reported by multiple members of the search team, that something felt wrong in the tunnel. Several men reported feeling watched while working underground. Others described an oppressive atmosphere that made them uncomfortable. But these were subjective impressions, not evidence. Hamilton's official report, filed with the Northern Pacific Railroad on October 25, 1889, concluded that the workers had likely been victims of some catastrophic event that had also removed or buried their bodies. He suggested the possibility of an extremely localized cave-in that had collapsed and then been filled in somehow, or perhaps an explosion that had vaporized everything. These theories were clearly inadequate, but they were the best Hamilton could offer that did not venture into admitting complete bafflement. The families of the missing workers were not satisfied with this explanation. 23 men did not simply vanish. There had to be answers. The workers were mostly immigrants, but they had established themselves in Montana, had saved money, and had families depending on them. The Irish community in particular, having lost 11 men from the Western crew, organized to demand a more thorough investigation. The railroad company, facing pressure and potential lawsuits, brought in outside experts. A team from the U.S. Geological Survey examined the tunnel in November 1889. Their report, preserved in the National Archives, is notable for what it implies without directly stating. The geologist noted that the rock at the breakthrough point showed unusual characteristics. The black metamorphic stone, locally called Blackstone, contained mineral inclusions they could not immediately identify. More significantly, the rock appeared to have acoustic properties that were highly unusual. Sounds echoed in ways that did not match the tunnel geometry. The geologists also noted that compass readings were unreliable near the breakthrough point, suggesting magnetic anomalies in the rock. Most intriguing was a cryptic statement in the report's conclusion. The geological features of this tunnel, particularly at the convergence point of the two bores, display characteristics that warrant further study. However, such study may be inadvisable given the circumstances of the workers' disappearance. It is the opinion of this survey team that work on this tunnel should not proceed until a more complete understanding of the site's geological properties can be achieved. This was a remarkable statement. Geologists essentially saying that a construction project should be halted, not because of structural concerns, but because the rock itself was somehow problematic. The railroad company chose to ignore this advice. They needed the tunnel completed. Too much money had been invested to abandon the project over vague geological concerns and the unexplained disappearance of 23 workers. However, tragic that was. In December 1889, the railroad company hired a new crew to complete the final work in the tunnel. This crew was offered higher wages than normal, premium pay to compensate for the unsettling circumstances. 30 men were hired, and they entered the tunnel on December 9th to finish reinforcing the breakthrough area and laying the track bed. The plan was to have the tunnel operational by the end of the month. The new crew lasted exactly 4 days. On December 13th, the entire crew emerged from the tunnel and refused to continue work. The crew foreman, a man named Edward Mason, resigned immediately and left Montana. Other crew members who were willing to talk to the local newspaper described experiencing phenomena they could not explain. Sounds in the tunnel that had no source. Shadows that moved when no one was near. A pervasive sense of dread that intensified near the breakthrough point. Several men reported seeing figures in the darkness, human-shaped but wrong somehow, visible only in peripheral vision. Most disturbing was an incident that occurred on December 12th. According to multiple witnesses, one of the workers, a man named Joseph Turner, had been examining the symbols carved at the breakthrough point. He had been staring at them for several minutes, apparently fascinated. When his colleagues called to him, he did not respond. They approached and found Turner standing motionless, staring at the symbols, unresponsive to their attempts to get his attention. When they physically pulled him away from the rock face, he screamed and collapsed. He was carried to the surface, where he regained consciousness but could not or would not speak about what had happened. He left Montana the next day and was never heard from again. This incident broke the new crew's resolve. They had been uneasy about working in a tunnel where 23 men had vanished. The incident with Turner convinced them that the tunnel was actively dangerous in ways that went beyond normal construction hazards. They quit en masse. The railroad company attempted to hire a third crew in January 1890. They offered even higher wages. They got no takers. Word had spread throughout the railroad construction community. The Blackstone Tunnel was cursed. No amount of money would convince experienced workers to go back into that mountain. The railroad faced a choice: abandon the tunnel and the entire branch line, or find some way to complete the work despite the supernatural aura that now surrounded the project. They chose a middle path. In February 1890, railroad officials made the decision to seal the tunnel permanently. The stated reason given to investors and the public was that engineering difficulties and geological instability made completion impractical. The real reason, according to internal company memos discovered in railroad archives decades later, was that the tunnel had become impossible to work in due to worker resistance and increasingly bizarre incidents that the company could not explain or control. The sealing operation was carried out by a demolition crew using dynamite. The plan was to collapse the tunnel at both portals, ensuring no one could enter. The demolition crew set charges at both ends and detonated them on February 28, 1890. The explosions were successful. Tons of rock fell, blocking both entrances completely. The Blackstone Tunnel was sealed, and with it, the mystery of what happened to the 23 workers. But sealing the tunnel did not end the story. Over the following decades, the area around Blackstone Peak acquired a dark reputation. Local residents reported strange phenomena. Sounds emanating from within the mountain, as if work was still continuing in the sealed tunnel. Lights visible on the mountainside at night, though no one was there. And most disturbing, reports of figures seen near the collapsed portals. Figures that looked like the missing workers, visible only at dawn or dusk, standing motionless as if waiting for something. In 1902, 12 years after the tunnel was sealed, a mining company attempted to investigate whether the tunnel could be reopened and used for ore transport. A survey team examined the western portal and found that while the entrance was thoroughly collapsed, it would be theoretically possible to re-excavate it with sufficient effort. But when workers began removing rock, they experienced the same phenomena that had driven away the 1889 crews. Unexplained sounds, feelings of dread, shadows that moved independently of any light source. The survey was abandoned after 2 days. In 1915, during World War I, when metal demand was high, another attempt was made to access the tunnel. This time, engineers brought modern equipment and electric lighting, confident that previous incidents had been the result of primitive working conditions and superstitious workers. This crew lasted 1 week before abandoning the project. Their foreman, a pragmatic man named John Morrison, wrote in his report that something in that mountain makes men afraid. In a way I cannot explain. My crew would not stay near the portal after the sun went down. Several reported seeing the missing workers standing in the rubble watching us. I myself saw nothing, but I will not ask men to work where they feel such fear. The railroad company, by this point, had written off the Blackstone Tunnel as a complete loss. The branch line it was meant to enable was never completed. The mining operations on the far side of the mountain were accessed by longer, more expensive routes. The tunnel itself became a local legend, a cautionary tale told in mining camps and railroad construction sites across the West. Don't end up like the Blackstone 23. That's what workers would say to each other when discussing dangerous projects or cutting corners on safety. But the story took a darker turn in 1923, when a group of young men from Missoula decided to investigate the tunnel as a lark. There were 4 of them, all in their early 20s, who thought the stories about the cursed tunnel were nonsense. They hiked to the site of the western portal on October 17, 1923, exactly 34 years to the day after the original disappearance. They brought rope, lanterns, and tools, intending to dig through the collapsed entrance and explore what remained of the tunnel. Three of them returned that evening, terrified and refusing to explain what had happened. The fourth, a young man named Robert Ellis, was missing. Search parties scoured the area for days. Ellis was never found. The three survivors were questioned repeatedly by authorities, but their accounts were so fragmentary and disturbed that little useful information could be extracted. One of them kept repeating, "We should not have gone on that day, not that day." Another mentioned seeing Ellis walk into darkness that should not have been there, a gap in the collapsed rock that seemed to open as they approached. The third survivor stopped speaking entirely and spent the rest of his life in silence. This incident convinced local authorities to take more aggressive action. In 1924, the county sheriff obtained a court order declaring the tunnel site a dangerous area and prohibiting public access. Warning signs were posted. The area was fenced. Forest Service rangers were instructed to turn away anyone attempting to approach the site. This prohibition remains in effect to this day, though the stated reasons have changed over the decades. Initially, it was public safety due to unstable collapsed rock. Later, it was wilderness preservation. Most recently, the area has been included in protected grizzly bear habitat. In 1945, during the final months of World War II, something strange happened at Blackstone Mountain. Multiple residents of Missoula reported hearing explosions from the direction of the peak on the night of April 14th. The sounds were loud enough to rattle windows in town 15 miles away. The next morning, people who hiked to the area reported finding fresh blast marks near the site of the western portal, as if someone had used dynamite recently. But no one had authorization to be doing any kind of blasting in that area. Federal authorities investigated briefly, but provided no public explanation. The incident was quietly classified and forgotten. Declassified military documents discovered in the 1990s suggest that the April 1945 incident may have been related to a secret military project. During the war, the Army was investigating unusual geological phenomena for potential weapons applications. A team had been dispatched to Blackstone Mountain to examine the magnetic and acoustic anomalies that had been documented in 1889. According to fragmentary records, this team may have attempted to access the tunnel, using explosives to clear the collapsed portal. The documents abruptly cease after April 14, 1945, with a final notation marked classified. Project terminated. Site secured. What happened to that military team is not detailed in any publicly available documents, but local oral history includes stories of Army vehicles arriving in the area, followed by activity around the mountain for several days, and then the sudden departure of all personnel. Old-timers in Missoula tell stories their parents told them about soldiers who came to investigate the tunnel and left looking shaken, about orders that the site was to be permanently closed, about warnings that anyone who approached the area would be arrested for interfering with national security. In 1967, a documentary filmmaker named Michael Chen became interested in the Blackstone Tunnel story while researching a program about abandoned railroad projects. He obtained permission from the Forest Service to film near the site, claiming he was documenting wildlife. What he was really interested in was the tunnel legend. Chen and his two-person crew hiked to the site of the western portal in August 1967. They found the collapsed entrance thoroughly overgrown with vegetation. The warning signs were faded but still present. Chen set up his camera and began filming the site, documenting the remnants of the old railroad grade and the mound of rock that marked where the portal had been. Then something appeared on his film that he had not seen with his naked eye. When he reviewed the footage later, he saw figures, multiple human-shaped silhouettes visible in several frames, standing near the collapsed portal. They had not been there when he was filming. His crew had not seen them, but the camera had captured something. Chen attempted to use this footage in his documentary, but before he could complete the project, he received a visit from federal agents. They confiscated his film, claiming it showed sensitive government property. They warned him not to discuss what he had filmed or return to the site. Chen complied, frustrated but aware that fighting federal authority would be pointless. He abandoned the documentary project and never spoke publicly about the incident, though he did share the story with close friends in the years before his death in 2003. The most recent documented incident at Blackstone Mountain occurred in 1995. Two experienced cavers from California were exploring the region and heard about the old railroad tunnel. They decided to investigate whether any natural cave openings might connect to the sealed tunnel. Using topographic maps and geological surveys, they identified a small cave entrance on the southern slope of the mountain, roughly aligned with where the tunnel should be located underground. The cavers, both in their 30s and highly experienced, entered this cave with full equipment and safety precautions. They explored for several hours, following passages that descended into the mountain. At a depth they estimated as roughly 200 feet, they encountered something that made them immediately retreat. According to their later statement to Forest Service rangers, they found a passage that showed clear evidence of human excavation, tool marks on the walls, timber supports, old but still intact. They had intersected the Blackstone Tunnel from below, accessing it through a natural cave connection that had not been known to exist. But they did not continue into the tunnel. They both reported feeling overwhelming dread as soon as they realized where they were. One of them described hearing sounds from deeper in the tunnel. Sounds like metal striking rock, as if someone was still working in there. The other reported seeing a light in the distance, like a lantern, moving in the darkness. They retreated immediately and reported their discovery. Forest Service rangers investigated and found the cave entrance. Rather than explore it themselves, they sealed it with concrete and steel bars. The official reason given was protection of endangered bat species, but the rangers involved, speaking years later in private, admitted they had been instructed by higher authorities to seal any potential access to the Blackstone Tunnel quickly and permanently. They were told the tunnel was contaminated with toxic materials from the 1889 construction, and that public safety required complete closure. This brings us to the present day. More than 130 years after 23 workers vanished in the Blackstone Tunnel, the site remains closed and off-limits. The railroad that was never completed has been erased from most maps. The tunnel itself is sealed at both ends and has been deliberately removed from public records. Attempts to research the disaster run into missing documents and incomplete archives. It's as if someone has been systematically erasing the Blackstone Tunnel from history. But the mountain remembers. And those who live near Blackstone Peak remember. They tell stories passed down through generations. About the night of October 17, 1889, when something in that tunnel reached out and took 23 men. About the sounds that still echo from within the mountain on certain nights. About the figures seen near the collapsed portals. Waiting, always waiting. And about the warning carved into a rock near the western portal, found in 1910 and photographed before being removed by authorities. The inscription read, "They are still working. Do not let them out." Who carved that warning, no one knows. But it suggests that someone, at some point, knew or believed that the missing workers had not died, that they were somehow still in the tunnel, still working, trapped in the mountain by something they had released or discovered when the two bores met, and they carved through that final wall of black stone. What really happened on October 17, 1889? The official explanation is that 23 workers vanished due to an unexplained catastrophic event. Probably a cave-in that was so complete it left no trace. This explanation satisfies no one who examines the evidence. The tunnel was searched thoroughly. It was structurally sound. There was no way for 23 men to vanish from a sealed space unless something actively took them. The evidence points to something connected with the breakthrough point, the moment when the two tunnel bores met. Multiple witnesses described the symbols carved into the rock at that location. Symbols that appeared fresh, recently made. Who carved them? Workers from one of the crews, or were they already there, hidden in the rock, revealed only when the last barrier was removed? The geological survey noted unusual properties in the rock: magnetic anomalies, acoustic distortion. The stone at Blackstone Peak is different from surrounding mountains. Indigenous peoples who lived in the area for thousands of years before European contact had their own names for the mountain, names that translate as the Hollow Mountain or the Mountain that Speaks. They avoided it. They knew something about it that the railroad workers did not. Could the workers have tunneled into something, a natural void, a cavern? The surveys found no evidence of this. But what if there are spaces in the earth that do not register on normal instruments? Spaces that exist between geology and something else. The survivors of the 1889 work crews who quit after 4 days reported seeing shadows that moved independently, hearing sounds with no source, feeling watched by something they could not see. These are not the reports of structural problems. These are descriptions of an environment that has become hostile in ways that transcend normal physics. The military interest in the site during World War II suggests that someone in authority took the anomalies seriously. What were they looking for? What did they find? The fact that their investigation was classified and the project terminated suggests they encountered something they decided was too dangerous to pursue. And the continuing incidents. The 1923 disappearance of Robert Ellis. The 1995 cavers who found their way into the tunnel through a natural cave and fled from what they experienced there. These suggest that whatever is in Blackstone Mountain remains active. The tunnel was sealed in 1890, but sealing the portals did not seal whatever exists within. It trapped it there, but it did not neutralize it. 23 workers built the tunnel in 1889. None finished the job. They vanished into the mountain and were never found. The railroad sealed the tunnel with the bodies still inside because retrieving them would have meant going back into the depths where something had demonstrated its power over human life. The haunted railroad is exposed, but the full truth remains buried in sealed documents and inside a mountain that has proven, again and again, that it does not welcome human intrusion. The families of the 23 workers never received answers. They were told their loved ones had died in an industrial accident. They were given modest compensation. They buried empty coffins or placed memorial stones in cemeteries. But they knew the truth was being hidden from them. They knew that something terrible had happened in that tunnel. Something that authorities could not explain and would not acknowledge. Today, if you hike to Blackstone Peak, which requires entering posted restricted areas and risking federal trespassing charges, you can find the site of the Western Portal. It's just a mound of collapsed rock, overgrown with scrub pine and wild grass. Nothing marks it except the faded warning signs and the remains of old fencing. But local hunters and hikers avoid it. They say you can sometimes hear sounds from within the mountain. The ring of metal on stone, the echo of voices speaking in languages that are not quite identifiable. And if you visit on October 17th, the anniversary of the original disappearance, some claim you can see them, the 23 workers, standing near the collapsed portal, watching, waiting, perhaps hoping someone will reopen the tunnel, perhaps warning others to stay away. No one who claims to have seen them has been brave enough to approach close enough to find out which. The Blackstone Tunnel remains one of the most disturbing mysteries in American railroad history. 23 experienced workers vanished without trace from a sealed space. Every attempt to investigate has been met with more unexplained phenomena and more disappearances. The site remains closed more than a century later for reasons that evolve but never fully explain why such extreme measures are necessary. And deep in the mountain, in darkness that has not seen light since 1890, 23 men may still be working, still drilling, still blasting, trapped by something they released when they broke through that final wall of black stone, forever completing a tunnel that can never be finished. This is the legacy of the Blackstone Tunnel, a warning about the dangers of tunneling without understanding what lies beneath, a testament to the arrogance of believing we can bore through mountains without consequence, and a reminder that some places guard secrets that are not meant to be disturbed. The railroad wanted a tunnel. They got one, but the cost was 23 lives and the admission that there are forces in this world that do not yield to human ambition or industrial progress. 23 workers built the tunnel. None finished the job. The haunted railroad is exposed, but the deepest secrets remain sealed inside Blackstone Mountain, along with whatever took those 23 men and has waited there ever since. In the darkness beneath thousands of feet of stone, where neither light nor rescue can reach,